I'm Marcel Bucsescu with NACD and the national office. I'm based here in New York, so delighted to join you this afternoon. I oversee the certification program and want to take a moment to first start by expressing my appreciation to each of you for committing to the program, for your active participation as we've grown this, to your feedback throughout, help us make it better. This really is a director-led initiative. You may have seen we just crossed 1,500 certified directors last month. It was great to be with a few of you out in San Francisco last month as well. Lisa and team put together a great dinner down on the waterfront and hope to create a lot more opportunities for this group to come together virtually. I know we'll be talking about future dates a little later, but also in person throughout. Some of you may be joining us over in DC in a couple of weeks at Summit. We have a fun NACD Directorship certification after party there. So after your dinners and all the work you put into the day, come up and relax at the nightclub for a couple of hours with your peers. So hope to see you there. We're going to have a fun conversation today, joined by 4 of your peers from the chapter. I'll go in alphabetical order, though they're kind of jumbled in my screen. First is Steve Aldrich, up there in the middle. Hi, Steve. Christine Gorjanc is there as well. Lou Miramontes and Mary Rotunno. Thank you, sorry. Are going to join us. They're going to help us lead the discussion today. But we do want this to be a group setting. One of the things that the NorCal chapter has done an outstanding job on is creating these virtual cohorts, and we're looking to leverage those learnings and expertise for this community as well. And so this is the second of these meetings. But unlike the last meeting, what we're going to try to do here is actually keep the group all together. And we do want interaction throughout. So while Steve, Lou, Christine, and Mary are ready to kind of prompt the discussion, put some thinking out there, we want to hear from all of you, your reactions, your questions, things you're thinking about on the topics that we're going to dive into. We don't stand on formality here. You can raise your hand. I can see most of you on video. If you want to drop a little, hey, heads up in the chat, that works too. You can raise your hand. If you've got the feature turned on, if you raise your hand will go up. We'll try to get to you. And if I'm not for any reason, or if one of the speakers aren't, feel free to jump in and say, hey, what about? I just heard the quick audio thing. Let's try to stay on mute as long as you're not speaking so we minimize disruption. You should all have control over your audio, so unmute when called upon, come on in, and we'll have hopefully a really fun, robust discussion today. We're operating out of the last discussion under the theme of headlines and trend lines. So we've got some kind of top line news items to put out there, but we want to really get into the discussion of what it really means, what's real, what's noise, how it's impacting your roles day in and day out, how you're thinking about it, and the questions or items you want to discuss with your peers here. So that's the intention. We've got 4 topics teed up, plus a couple of others we might hit on quickly. Then we've got some time at the end for open dialogue, other topics you might want to raise. So any questions about the process, the protocol? Everybody's ready to be engaged. If you don't have your camera on and you want to be engaged, please do turn it on. And again, I look forward to an active discussion. Just for the sake of knowing who's speaking, who's leading our discussion today along with me, I'm going to invite Steve, Christine, Mary, and Lou to briefly say hello and introduce themselves. So Steve, I'll start with you. Quick hello, boards, any relevant experience?
Hey all, Stephen Aldrich. I have been on public boards now for over half a decade. I've been on 2 boards pretty consistently, rolled off one earlier this year, replaced it with another, and a focus primarily on tech, small business, financial services. In addition to my public company board roles, I'm the chair of a purpose-driven professional soccer team in Oakland called the Oakland Roots at Oakland Soul.
Thanks, Steve. Christine, go ahead.
Sure. And Christine Gorjanc, my operational role was CFO, most recently at Netgear and Arlo Technologies, but I am on the board of Juniper Networks, Invitae, Shapeways 3D printing company, and then a private company, Carbon Health. And being a CFO, I'm always on the audit committee.
Thanks,
Hi,
Christine.
this is
Lou? Yeah.
Thank you. So my history is I spent 38 years at KPMG and retired from there about 9 years ago. Seemed like yesterday. My board roles include Lithium Motors, which is a large national and now international auto dealership chain. Opportune Financial Corporation. It's a fintech based in Silicon Valley, and one private board called Brown and Caldwell. And I've had the pleasure on Lithia of being on every single committee. So audit, comp, in fact, I've been the chair of all three. Now I'm the chair of the comp committee, but my primary role usually is audit committee, given I'm a CPA.
Thanks, Lou. Mary?
Hi, I'm Mary Rotunno. I currently serve on 2 boards, one public, one private. I've been on the public company board, VistaGen Therapeutics, for about 2 years, and I serve on the audit committee, and I also chair the non-gov committee. And then I'm also on the board of Sanitize Research and Development, which is a Canadian company, another pharma company. And there I'm the chair of the HR and Compensation Committee, and I also recently chaired the CEO Succession Committee. And my day job is I'm general counsel and executive at El Camino Health. So my background, my entire career has been in healthcare, starting as a registered nurse, and then I transitioned to healthcare law.
Well, I hope everyone will join me in thanking Steve, Christine, Lou, and Mary for helping lead this discussion and enjoying seeing all the greetings from all over, frankly, in the chat. So keep that up. So here's the plan. We're going to address a few topics. I mentioned headlines, so we're going to start there. I've got a few headlines printed out here, and I'm going to throw them to the group and ask for their reaction. And the first one might not surprise anyone, but this headline is New Year. We're a little far into the year. Same ESG challenges. Overstretched boards face barrage of global regulation. Steve, I'm going to look to you first. Is that a board's worst nightmare? Becoming a compliance-oriented, over-regulated board? What say you?
Oh boy, it's a real challenge today. I was just thinking about prepping for the upcoming board meeting cycle. And I was looking through the agendas. I'm like, okay, new SEC cybersecurity regulations, special session, upcoming new comp people committee conversation about performance and pay for performance requirements, ESG reporting and quality of data coming to the audit committee, then the full board, like on and on and on. And I went to go look, Marcel, at this the other day. I'm like, am I just dreaming it, or is this becoming more and more prevalent and taking more and more of our agenda time? And a Thomson Reuters survey said the #1 concern for compliance officers is the volume and implementation of regulatory change. And they got 64,000 regulatory alerts in 2021. I'm like, okay, if chief compliance officer is worried about that, as a board member, I'm worried about that. So yeah, it's deeply concerning. And I think some of the questions to ponder are, how do we do the rest of our jobs as board members, as we think more broadly about the concept of our role, governance, strategy, people, performance, engaging with shareholders, and we can consume all of our time on this increasing compliance burden. So yes, concerned about that and trying to find ways to manage it. I've got some ideas, and maybe we can talk about that as we get into the conversation.
Yeah, that'd be great. Let me look to Mary, Christine, and Lou if they have anything they want to chime in there. I mean, I saw a lot of nodding heads on the cameras, so I think we're in broad agreement there. But anything you would add, Lou? I see you came off mute.
Yes, Steve, great summary, and I feel your pain. I think what I've observed in the last 12 to 18 months is really increasing the workload of the committees. At the board meeting, it's usually a packed agenda, so it's tough to get into a lot of debate. But clearly, the committees, outreaching to management, who's assigned to cyber area, pay for performance, the other topics you mentioned, and we're necessary outside advisors. A lot more work, a lot more meetings. So clearly, the committee role, the committee activity is increasing significantly on the boards that I sit on.
Yeah, and I think to assess the quality of the management team too, how much, how much can you assume that they are taking care of and letting you know versus maybe the smaller companies that need more help and reminders? So I do think the size of the board and the quality of the management team on, you know, if they have a compliance department or if it's just internal audit or what is it, I think that makes a difference too. And I think the smaller companies need more help or even more time, even though everybody's spending time. So I think you just kind of have to assess each board differently.
Yeah,
Mary, I got to look to you. You're a law department in a highly regulated industry, right?
I would just add that I think in following up on what Christine said, I think the general counsel plays a big role in assisting the board. But in addition, at least the public company board that I'm on, as chair of the NomGov committee, our committee is taking on reviewing all the committee charters and trying to distribute the oversight of these different areas that are kind of being added by through the regulations and have them distributed to the different committees so that everything's not kind of falling onto the audit committee or one specific committee.
It's interesting. I appreciated all those answers. And I think there's still this increased level of work and increased scrutiny of how directors are doing on these particular compliance questions and real risk, right? If our companies make an error in one of these areas, that becomes quite time consuming. Sorry about the siren, I look like we're by here. But one of the challenges then becomes, how do you manage the risk of something going wrong and trusting management, which I think is our role. And yet at the same time, we have duty of oversight and duty of care. So part of where we're trying to balance is how deep do we go? What are the either reports we need to have or conversations we need to have to check in on, are we comfortable with the direction these topics are headed? And then can we time box it? Okay, this is one we need to go deep on. These other ones are fine in committee or with the leadership team. And then let's ensure we still have enough time for the rest of our operating cycle and rest of the strategy reviews and people reviews as well. So we're trying to mix a whole bunch of these things together to get all the work accomplished in the time we've got.
And I think you have individual board members talking to individual management members. Maybe your tech person is talking to your CIO, your audit committee, obviously usually CFO, and to manage all of the communication, I think is also challenging to make, so we don't do it twice and go hit management twice to do something and yet make sure we bring all the right information up to the board levels. Are people having like the committee chairs meet so they coordinate? Are they having overlapping committee members, which I've seen? So then you kind of know between audit committee and comp, sometimes there's a lot of, stuff that goes back and forth. So, the other question is, how are people handling the communication of who's doing what? So we're not doing double duty and bothering management, or we're not getting the information because we think somebody else did.
Yeah, Christine, that's awesome. We do chairs meeting on one board. Another board we have overlapping, and third board is actually, we have the chair sits in on each of the meetings. So the burden on the chair there is quite high. And I think Mary's point of, in some cases you could have a management team member make sure that he or she is tying the dots across as well, whether that's the GC or another member of management.
Mary's Lou, I'll pile on to Mary's comment. Is I like the idea of the NomGov chair and committee allocating the responsibilities. So if you have a process that funnels these new requirements, so you got one place to receive them, analyze them, and allocate them out to respective committees, and then match that up with who at management is responsible for that particular topic or task. And we do that at Lithia, and our lead independent director meets we have a LID meeting 3 or 4 hours every meeting, and we talk about things like that. Is it, what's new, who's allocating it, who's a person management. It's not overnight. It's not a switch. You've got to work it at the board level and work it with the management level to make this process as seamless as possible. But clearly the focus is needed to make sure we cover all the bases. And your point, Stephen, as an auditor, I always worry about that is that, how deep do you dig till you reach a conclusion? And did you dig deep enough to find the evidence to support the assertion or the disclosure that's being made? And I think those kinds of principles will be applying to all of us. Areas is how thorough should we be? How deep should we dig? How do we, vet the response challenge management, use outside advisors or auditors to help us do lift.
Well, let me ask a question for each of you. We've talked kind of about the board level and the process level. What about as individuals? How are you getting yourselves comfortable and read up so that you feel like you have your own understanding of the scope and scale of this change, and that when you go in, you feel confident enough to engage and ask some of those key questions? You doing anything differently? Steve, maybe I'll start with you again.
Sure. Well, there are a couple of resources. I mean, not surprisingly, the NACD puts out a number of position papers, and every day I get an update from the NAC Daily News that talks through what's happening. And actually, the Harvard Law Review puts out a daily summary as well that I find super helpful. It's got just really, really good summaries from primarily well-respected law firms on topics that are coming up primarily in governance. And those are risks to keep an eye on and emerging risks. And then finally, I have some industry newsletters as well to stay current on the verticals in which I focus, so that I feel like, okay, in about a 20-minute segment in the morning of glancing through email, I can get up to speed on new and emerging topics that are popping up, and then decide what depth do I need to go in on those.
Christine, I'm going to come to you in a second, but Mary, I'm assuming you don't want 10, 11, 12 phone calls asking for an explanation on everything as the GC, right?
No, I mean, I think typically working through the committee chairs is the most efficient. Speaking with my GC hat on.
Yeah. All right. So if you're looking for additional resources, go to the chair, ask for what you need, coordinate the rollout. Christine, did you want to chime in there?
Yeah, no, I think it's the same thing. I think you have to spend more time getting yourself up to speed. You can't expect the board to do it. I mean, like sometimes you can have a presentation in the board. We really want something on cyber, or, my last board meeting at one company, we had Mandiant come in and talk to us. But I think you really have to do it yourself. And just like Steve said, and then you can bring better questions to that. So I do think it's a lot more work staying up to speed than it probably was 10 years ago. When I think about boards, when I was sitting on this in the CFO role, it was mainly us bringing them up to speed, and they each had their own lane, that they knew. But other than that, I just think it's a lot of work, and we have to do that to be on a board, and you just have to know you have to spend that time.
Lou, anything you would add there?
Yeah, it's a lot more personal time. I have my routine every morning where I open up NACD for sending that to us. I think the topics and the trainings that are offered. I attend seminars through the Financial Times. My former firm KPMG. There's a board website, Leadership Center website that comes out with something every couple of days. But lately, they've had a lot of podcasts that you can actually walk around and listen to different topics. So I make it intentional to keep myself as sharp as possible. So it's a daily routine. Sometimes it's a 10-minute check-in, but sometimes it's half a day just getting through things. I enjoy that kind of thing.
That's great. And just to call out, Steve posted the link to the Harvard Law School Corporate Governance blog in there if you're not familiar with it. Lucian Bebchuk's shop. But thanks, Lou. Let me quickly pause. See, anybody have any reactions they want to share from the group? Feel free to chime in, raise a hand, put a chat in. Anybody think this is a positive development in the right way for boards? Just curious. No.
I don't
All right,
think
I'm going to go.
It's a bad thing to be educated about what's going on. It just, it goes back to the original one. The compliance that's coming out of the SEC right now is pretty astounding from that perspective.
And I mean, I think Laura, please.
I think, in addition to the work burden, the way it's coming about is so fragmented. It's this topic and drilling down in this area, and then here comes another, and here comes another. And so I really feel like it fragments the attention of the board and of management. Mm-hmm. And, there's no way so far, but I'd love to see, a counter movement to say, transparency is great, disclosure is great, et cetera, and so on. But how do we make this more holistic and more strategic, so that we can pull it back together and level up? It feels like it's pulling us down into minutia.
And to kind of underscore that point, I think we're starting to look at the deadline by which the current SCC has to get their rules in if they want it to stick. So we're going to see a pretty hard push over the next, let's say, 6 months or so. I think we're expecting climate in, sometime towards the end of October, maybe. So more to come. Maybe we'll talk about this, the Compliance Board Part 2 or Redux at our next session. I'm going to go back to the headlines here. I got a Financial Times headline, "The appeal for executives of having private equity owners." And then one from Institutional Investor, "Want a better board? Look to private equity." Christine, you had some thoughts about this. What do you
Sure.
think?
The interesting thing when I think about private equity board or even maybe a startup and a VC, a lot of that is about, growth and numbers. There's a lot of focus on that, and especially on the PE side. Oftentimes, if they come in and buy a company, they're looking for, making the numbers work. Not often always understanding how hard that is to actually do, being in an operational role that, no, we can't fix that giant problem in 6 months, or we need a system automation. So I think coming in on a board and as an independent of a private company, via VC owned, PE owned, you get to play a balancing role between management and the owners. And and just like the NACD dinner we had a couple of weeks ago on a private board, you should have a role. Your role on that board should be very defined, meaning you came in because you have a skill set they need. If it's go to market, if it's making connections for them. But you can also play that role, again, to help management, to help the other side, the owners, understand, your point of view, and sometimes bridge that gap in a nice way. I've seen it done in several private board meetings where the independent comes in and can ease the tension a little bit between the two, and it works nicely. So I just think that. But what the PE boards also do is act quickly. And sometimes I think the complaint on the public boards is, yeah, we know we're spending too much money, but we're not cutting it fast enough, or we know revenue's not growing, or we need to transition to a different channel, and it doesn't happen fast enough. And then I think just like a PE would come in or an activist would come in, how do you do it faster? You rarely learn of a new problem that you have when an activist comes in. You know exactly when they come in, probably why they're coming in and what you need to do about it. And all of a sudden you do it faster, or if you get, lucky and have the right facts, you can win a proxy battle against them. So I do think from the public board side, it means acting quicker, with urgency, and trying to identify issues and not wait too long to solve them. I know you're trying to get everyone consensus, trying to understand the messaging of it, but I do think acting quicker is something that when I look back on all the boards I'm at, there's many times that I think we could have acted quicker.
So where the old mantra might have been think like an activist, perhaps it's time for think like a PE firm or something like that.
Yeah, I think it's either. They're not different. They're usually all about the math, right? Maybe the PE firm's in for the longer haul on that, a lot of them, but they're still probably going to have an exit versus they might, an activist might only be in the short run.
Lou, Mary, anything you want to add there? Steve, I see you came on. Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, I like that framing around, I think activists tended to push on topics that feel like they're lagging and that they're out there in the world. Management knows it. Please make a decision or be transparent if you can why the decision hasn't been made. The private equity firms that I've been in, what I've been happy there and want to bring back to the boards that we sit on are tackle those issues and the focus on very few levers that are going to really move the needle. I think that really, for me, creates maybe a differentiation of very operationally intensive private equity conversations to look value versus, and this is going to be too simplistic, but more transactional perhaps for some of the activists. And both can work. And which lever or which hat are you going to put on when you're on the board and trying to take that mind boardroom?
Lou?
Yeah, I think the whole deal of activists or private equity firm, you know, when you have an outsider coming in, looking at the organization, you know, they have a critical eye and an objective there, and they're there to challenge management, challenge the board as to performance. Clearly, at times when a company's not performing well, or valuations have dipped, or we've got chaos in some markets that we have today, you know, they're more engaged. And so, and what I've learned is that, you know, they identify many topics, many changes that could be considered and or implemented. Interestingly, a lot of those you already knew about as a board, as a management team. But when things are going well, perhaps you don't push the objective, you don't push change so fast or so, you know, quick. So I think that the benefit of thinking like an activist or having a private equity perspective is, what would they say about our organization? What would they say about your board? And you know, and annually look at those and ask yourselves, are we really focused on the right issue? We're making adequate change. As we look at allocation of capital, where have we spent money the last 2 or 3 years? Do we know what that is? And Steve, you brought this up at a previous call. Is there a specific number that's in mind of pre-free cash flow? Where does that go? And how do you measure the benefit of that investment? So all those perspectives of decision-making, allocation of capital, return on investment, and making changes where necessary. Not every deal, not every activity is going to pay off. You need to measure it, so that's time to pull the plug, take the capital off the table if there's any left, and redeploy it in something else or something new. So I think that having the mindset of a board member and a board, or what would our outside investors or our activists think about us? You know, I had a situation that's one just recently where, you know, the activists send these letters to the public and criticizing the board over many things. And again, most of those topics are not new. Question is, you know, why didn't we do it before, or how do we defend it now? And that's what I would say. Therefore, that's the benefit, is having a cold look, independent view of the operation, allowing more focus on the kids and quicker decision making and quicker implementation.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I think the one other thing is it's fewer priorities, or like you're saying, which levers move the needle. I think sometimes within the company, there's a whole lot of priorities, and focusing down on the few that really matter and making sure we're measuring those are also really helpful.
Mary, I want to make sure you have a chance to chime in here as well, if you'd like.
Yeah, I didn't have anything to add.
Okay.
I agree with the other comments.
Let me kind of try to provoke this. I mean, one of the mantras out there, right, for in particular public company directors, but all directors on some level, is this nose in, fingers out. And I think the private equity model for directors is almost flip. So you get in there, you roll up your sleeves, get your hands dirty. I mean, it's a different mindset as a director and how you're going to engage with the company, where you're going to sit, what you're going to look at, to get to some of the comments made. But do you all see an opportunity for directors to push more in that direction too? That, I mean, you need to think about your role differently and engage differently, ask for different questions. What's your reaction there?
One, I think it depends on the size of the company. If they just went public or getting ready to go public, it's almost the opposite. You're really helping. You got put on there to mentor one of the executives, the CEO, the CFO, help them get through the audit, the IPO, and then really start to build the board to, you know, have a really sort of a best practice governance model. So I do think it's reversed a little bit, and then eventually you get there. But I'd say even today, you're not supposed to do management's job, but I do think you have a lot of conversations that we didn't have before. You're there to support them, maybe mentor them. I've seen it's nice. We're a board member. We switch every year with a different executive, and you go to lunch a couple times, have some conversations, get to know them, get to know the company, maybe ask questions you wouldn't ask in the board meeting or don't have the time. So I do think it's changing a little bit, but it's always dependent on what the CEO is comfortable with, what the chairman is comfortable with. But if nobody wants anyone to talk to anyone or step over the line, then that should make you question something too.
Other comments?
I think. Let me just, Marcel, let me pile on. You know, I think it is time where it needed to lean in a little more, you know, hands in, or whatever you want to call it. You know, times where there's been a problem, you know, I've looked at myself, said, geez, I should have asked more questions. I should have looked further into the operations. So I think it's a judgment call, and professionally we have to do that. If we think there's an issue and there's resistance from CEO, and they all resist, and the lead board member or the chair, work with them to, debate what your concerns are and get to the details so you have an answer. But the answer is, my mind is that the hands off, nose in, hands off doesn't always work. And when we have challenging economic situations here, it's time to be more proactive.
Let me see if there are any, thanks, Lou. Any comments, reactions from the audience? And while people are thinking about it, we'll share. There's a professor at Columbia Law School, worked with a professor at Stanford. They're doing this, trying to look at the kind of updated role of the director, and they're looking at the private equity model. And so there's some research coming out of Columbia and Harvard, if you like that sort of thing, trying to reframe or rescope the role of the public company director that really draws on the private equity model. And we can find that and circulate it for those that are interested. Anybody sit on any PE boards that want to share their perspective, or perhaps have actually taken some of those practices over to their other board roles? Steve?
Yeah, I sat on a PE board. Yeah, I sat on a PE board for a couple of years, and we had a successful exit. And it's interesting. There, the focus on governance is way less. Like, it's so operational, and the expectation was each person on that board, I think Christine said this, each person on that board is there for a reason. Like, you have an expert in certain areas that the company knows they need as they're building up their management team. So the expectation is take a problem, go deep with a functional lens on that particular problem or opportunity, and stay with that. Don't do the work, but be there as ideally someone who's seen it before and can help guide. So I do think expectations are one level up in terms of, or maybe one level down is a better way to say it, one level down on the operational side of the ledger. And per the first conversation, governance is important, but it tends to be pushed off to the side. Like, are the levers that we expected to moving on this investment?
Right. Comments, questions from the group? Christina.
Yeah, I think, I've served on private equity and venture capital boards for a very long time. I've also served on really significant nonprofit and private company boards. And I think, there's a couple of distinctions you really have to recognize. One is, a lot of times for PE boards, it's not that they're not paying attention to governance. It's that either there's a control shareholder or an almost, 100% shareholder, very small ownership. They're really governing for themselves in many respects. And unless there's a secured lender or mezzanine debt lender, that's another stakeholder. There's customers, but I'm saying in general, the governance that's required at a public company or a private company with diverse stakeholders in terms of the shareholders is a much different exercise. So I think that's one of the reasons there's not as much emphasis on the governance aspect. I think one of the things that's important to note is, obviously there are different investment horizons, but what I've learned from serving on private equity board roles is that they really do focus on strategy, and they're pretty laser focused on it because they don't have a lot of time to execute, right? There's probably a 5-year runway to kind of get in, make changes, grow the company, conduct M&A exercises, all those good things. And you have to be laser focused, and they do get more involved in management. Sometimes I think that's a function of kind of the bandwidth of management in terms of really executing on all levels at all times in a concentrated period. I also think, though, that if you're used to working with larger companies, the executive teams are very well equipped to manage most of the exercises with general oversight. That doesn't necessarily hold true when you're working with, like, say, for example, a CFO of a lower middle market company or even a small cap company. You're not going to find the same level of expertise and more importantly, relationships. So a lot of times private equity has to jump in, frankly, just to deal with tasks like, communicating with bankers if things aren't going well. A CFO of a large company can do that, but you're not going to always find that at a private equity firm. So there's a lot of, I think you have to kind of look at what the end goal is, and also who the constituents are in terms of how you choose to involve yourself in the governance.
Thanks, Christina. Lara, you had your hand up. Did you want to jump in at all? And Alpna will come to you after.
No, Christina covered it. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Lara. Alpna, anything you wanted to add?
I was going to say Christina covered it all. I was maybe just one
Christina,
additional-
you're on the next session. Lisa will be in touch. We're going to bring you into that. Thank you. Jim, you had a comment here. Worked at one company. Was true. I think you're underscoring there that it really, I mean, so much of this is case by case specific. One interesting trend, though, in the other way is we've seen more and more PE companies really trying to focus in on governance, bring in strong independence. And I wonder if a lot of that's more about the exit strategy than the needs at the moment, right? Any other comments before we move on? I've got another headline here otherwise. Got two, actually, two headlines. All right, well, thanks for that. To be continued there. So this one is, this is a Market Watch headline here. The return to office battle just hit a tipping point. Companies won this round. The other one that I circulated amongst the group here, and if I don't know if others saw this, this was from a conference, I think out in Australia, where a local CEO said that workers have gotten arrogant and need to get put in their place. It's an interesting little tidbit. I think he walked back his comments later, but it was almost shocking. But we've got this return to work, return to the office, future of work concept. And Lou, I want to start with you, if I might. What's your take? Is this a battle where companies win or employees win? Is it zero sum? Or how are you thinking about the future of work, relationship with the workforce and human capital broadly?
Lisa informed me my audio is not that clear, so I'll try to slow down and make it clear. I did turn off. I live on a farm and I have satellite internet, so sometimes it doesn't work. My farmer friends must be sucking up all the satellite bandwidth. But on that topic, Marcel, I think that everyone has to win for this to work long term. And the question is, what are the battles and how do you get there? And you think back in 2020 when the pandemic hit and many corporations had no remote employees, had no remote work capabilities, and literally overnight in weeks, sometimes days, weeks, and everybody was working. That was an interesting phenomenon. I think a lot of organizations accelerated their digital strategy because of that. They learned a lot. Now we are here 23, and a lot of folks still are working away from the office. I asked around preparing for today about what other corporations are doing, and I've heard things like, "Hey, we're trying to get people in the office 3 days a week. We're achieving 2 days a week. There's 5 to 8% that will always stay home, 5 to 8% that will always come to the office, and then there's somewhere in between." And so the executive I spoke to said they're using a carrot approach to really provide reasons for being in the office. And knowing that, interacting with colleagues and listening to senior management and management being able to observe the development of younger professionals, younger executives, so you can see them in real time, how they handle stress, how they handle managing people, how they deal with clients, how they make decisions and the like. So it's clear there's a need to have people together more so than working from home. That's what I'm hearing. There are exceptions to that. Again, the 5% rule, if you will. This executive I spoke to said that they don't monitor when people come in specifically. There's no negative assessment on evaluation or pay if you're not coming to the office, even though the objective is there. But it gets back to how can you be successful and climb the ladder if that's your objective within an organization, without being seen, without being learning shoulder to shoulder from your fellow employees. So over time, as you look at those folks getting promoted and advancing, does coming to work versus not coming to work impact you? They don't know the answer. They don't know the answer. We'll see where that turns out. It's good to monitor. But I think overall, I think it's the employees will win because their careers will be better impacted having that balance. And I have a daughter who's worked for a professional services firm, and she has 2 kids, and her husband stays at home, and she's 3 days at the office, 2 days at home. Some days she wishes she's at the office 5 days because the kids are driving her nuts. Some days, you know, she wishes she's at home all the time because the kids are sick. So it's a balance. And so I think about, specifically in my family's case or other families, is that you have to be flexible to understand that there are times when they cannot come to the office. So I think that, you know, I read that article about, you know, employees who've gotten spoiled, the corporation need to insist on coming to the office. I don't know if that's the right approach, but, you know, saying I'm never going to the office because I moved 3 states away, depending on your role in the company, that may be possible, it may not be possible. And one last comment I'll make is that I've observed that folks that aren't in attractive communities, meaning major airport or the like, and when they go out and try to recruit talent, you know, like Lithia, they're in Southern Oregon and Medford, Oregon. So, well, how many people fly by Medford? Probably many, not too many. But you want the talent because it's a, you know, multinational company now. So they've decided for certain key roles, they allow the executives to be remote, although there's a lot of travel involved with those jobs. And so I think when you have a come into the office mindset for new hires, you may not get them. So you need to think about what that policy and what the procedures are for attracting and retaining those people.
Thanks.
There's some comments for you.
Thanks, Lou. I want to bring in the other, but Pam, I see your hand up. Did you want to jump in quickly here with a comment?
But yeah, if I could,
Please.
I support Lou's comments completely. And I think he hit it right on the head, which is that, you know, you can't make going to the office as just the default. And it has, I saw there was an article, I think it was today or yesterday in the Wall Street Journal about, you know, how companies are tracking every time you swipe your badge. It's become a little like the new time clock. And that's just going to lead to resentment among employees, not the way to do it. So the key is there has to be a reason. You can't just come to the office to sit in the office and work on your own, you know, and sit there. I have a daughter who's kind of, that they've said, come back to the office, but she ends up spending all day in one of the phone booths, you know, doing Zoom calls all alone. So that doesn't seem to hit the nail on the head and what we're trying to do. I did read something about, I think it was J.M. Smucker's company, where they've said there are critical weeks during the year, you know, live where you want, you know, live wherever you want, but there are a certain number of weeks during the year where you have to be on campus. And that's when really all the critical meetings are scheduled. It's all face-to-face time. And, you know, that we'll see how that plays out. I'm interested if they have some success with that, because I think you have to make it, give a reason to connect with people, to be in the office. If not, yeah, we can all just sit in our dining rooms, you know, and look at the Zoom.
Pam, thank you. Mary, I'm going to come to you on that notion because you're in an industry where it's not, I mean, you kind of are in person, right? And then Greg, I'll come to you.
Yeah, so in healthcare, at least on the provider and the health system side, I mean, the majority of our workforce has to be, they're clinical, they have to be here. But then, you know, legal, the IT, the finance, people on the, you know, support side have gone remote, and it's basically, you know, kind of looking at each job position and what is the reason? Is there a reason that somebody has to be there, or you know, as Pam said, are people going to be in their office on Zoom? There's no reason for that. So I agree with the approach about, you know, looking at, you know, each specific position, and I also think, you know, there's it depends on the industry, because if, you know, positions are still in demand, I think if companies make people come back to work, they're going to limit their candidate pool.
Christine, Steve, going to come to you in a minute. Greg, you've had your hand up.
Yeah, I think everybody had some really great points, and Lou and Pam and Mary. I would add to that, I think a lot of managers feel like there was a loss of productivity by not having people in the room rubbing shoulders. And I think people assumed, hey, it makes sense to have people back. But I think at the same time, you have to go that extra effort of building the business case, which is, I think, what everybody was kind of referring to. You have to approach it as a problem, come back with, why would we do this? Why would you be here? It has to be rewarding for, you think the job is rewarding, that's good enough, but I think you have to go beyond that and make the experience rewarding. Some of the things that have really backfired when people have brought people into the office and then they sat in their cubicles or what have you and didn't interact, that just reinforced everybody, I don't need to be here. I did this remote for 2 years. Why are you doing this to me? Whereas you have to look at that and really, as a management team, be pretty aggressive in trying to build. It's almost like building a new company culture or a startup culture where people are engaged and excited to see each other. And that takes work. That doesn't happen. Everybody's busy. It doesn't happen on its own. But I think you have to have that level of interaction and energy in order to get people to say, hey, this is important to be here 3 days a week or 2 days a week, whatever the number is. And people will choose to start to come in because they're going to get something out of it. And I think that Lou had mentioned this idea of training for younger people who haven't had a chance. There are people who've been in the workforce for 2 or 3 years, haven't been in an office really, haven't really had a supervisor that could see them work. And so giving them that reward of saying, this is why this is beneficial to you. And it's doing a game plan, and it takes work, but I think it pays off.
Thanks, Greg. So Christine and Steve, yeah, to you, but I also want you to think about like, okay, so as a director, what's your role in either supporting or pushing or challenging this and tracking it a little bit with an eye to the future workforce as well?
Yeah, I think I've got two perspectives as a director and as a leader. Like, we need some new leadership techniques for how to deal with distributed teams. Like, I still think about Tom Peters, MBWA, right? Okay, how do you manage by walking around when you don't have anybody to go walk around to? And so I don't think there's been an update to that kind of tried and true mechanism for building team, building a sense for how things are going. There is not a new way. So I think that's one area that we need some innovation. And then I think the second concept as a director is to have purposeful conversations with the leadership team. What is the philosophy? Is it, let's innovate, let everyone do their own thing, office by office? Or are you asking the leadership team to come back with a corporate approach? And again, I think we're leaning more towards experimentation happened. Now let's coalesce around one approach for the firm so that you don't have different teams with different philosophies, and then folks are being treated differently based on who their leader is.
Yeah, and I'm seeing some of the companies do satellite offices so they can accommodate, rather than everything's in San Francisco, maybe there's something, up the peninsula in Menlo Park and then something in San Jose, or obviously all over the country at different, but they're trying to look for areas where they have enough people that they can get that talent there and get them into the office and interacting with each other. But I do think from a board perspective, it's basically, are we getting the talent we need? Are we able to get and keep them? And I do think, like what Steve said, different ways of how this is going to work and manage it. It requires a lot of work on the managers to make it worthwhile for them to come in. We always used to have offsites, and now it's like an onsite. You have to do something fun on site to get everybody to go. And I think managers have to work hard to do that and pick why we're doing it. And I don't think people need to go in 24/7, be there 5 days a week from, 7 in the morning till 10 at night. That doesn't need to happen. And so ultimately, at least most of the companies I'm working with are heading towards a hybrid model and exactly what that looks like. But it does take people off the road several days a week too, because sitting in commute traffic for 2 hours a day doesn't make a lot of sense either. So I do think it's going to be from the top, and from a board. What are the employee surveys? What do they like, not like? Management talking about it, and are we getting the talent we need where we need it? And then who's getting stuck with a big piece of real estate that they're not using? So that's the other side question to that.
That's a big one. Terralyn, can I bring you in quickly? You've been a chief people officer now, thinking day in, day out about this. I mean, how are you thinking about the future of work these days? I think in part realizing you don't really have to answer that question for yourself and your organization at the moment, right? So.
Yeah, and I think this discussion really echoes a lot of the discussions that I'm having with a lot of my peers and with the management team as well, which is more a matter of understanding the type of worker and the industry that you're in. Because I can't remember who said it, might have been Mary, if you are in a manufacturing environment, remote work doesn't work. And at the same time, if you're early career, you do need that coaching and that mentoring. So I put it in chat, but really thinking about personas within your workforce and what you're trying to solve for with encouraging people to come in a portion of the time is great. Understanding also that employees have shifted their lives around to this remote environment and not having the commute. And so then it also comes into play this equity issue. So you've got working moms who now are used to working from home, who now have to figure out different childcare situations if you're requiring them to come in. I also know of a Silicon Valley company that's checking badges and checking when people come in, requiring people to come in 3 days a week. And there's stories of people now going into the office when they have the flu or with COVID, because they're saying, well, I have to go in because I haven't hit my 3 days this week and I'm going to be dinged. And I'm going to be on a list that's going to go up to management and I'm going to be asked why. And so I think we just have to be clear as to what we're solving for, what behaviors that we want to drive, and then really thinking about the purpose of coming back into work and the personas that should be coming into work.
Thank you, Teralyn. Any other comments on this topic? We're coming up on time soon. I want to make sure we have a few minutes to just have some open time among the group and then some closing thoughts. But any last comments
Marcel,
on this topic? Steve?
Yeah, the one last piece is, when we had larger, more centralized offices, and I think the world is moving away from that because you can access more talent, gives people more flexibility, keeps people in the workforce longer, and we're struggling to find and retain workers. But we used to have fewer offices where you had culture keepers in those spots. Now, if you have remote offices and lots of distributed teams, every team is at risk. If you have that smaller team who loses the critical leader, who was the culture keeper, I've seen those teams splinter very quickly. So there's a higher burden now on understanding turnover, culture keepers by location. And once you get a philosophy sorted, there's a bunch of operational questions and human capital questions that come quickly after.
So the annual, biannual kind of Gallup poll no longer cuts it, huh?
Correct. Pulses, continuously monitoring health and health in many different aspects of health is critical. And who do you drop in to go help out?
All right, Teralyn, you put your hand up, so you get the last call here.
It just actually, Stephen made me think of one other comment, which is, should we be asking a different question? So instead of asking the question of how do we get people back into the office, it might be more a matter of understanding how do we think differently about managing in this virtual environment, in this remote environment, and really changing the narrative. So instead of trying to force a situation, we actually think differently about it altogether.
All right, sorry, just writing that down for the recap later. Great discussion. We have a few minutes left here, and there's been really good conversation in the chat as well. So thanks for all that have contributed there. Take a moment here. And any other, does anybody happen to have a newspaper in front of them? There's a headline they're thinking about, reflecting on, they want to tee up for the group. Nude, I see you.
Mine was Taylor Swift's impact on the NFL on Sunday. That was the headline that I was thinking about. And actually, I'm now in sport, but the impact on celebrities and influencers on our businesses is more amplified than ever. Probably a different topic for a different time, but businesses in the consumer space are more and more having to sort out how do you stay relevant when you have such mega celebrities that can move literally millions of people in an afternoon.
Yeah, I used to work for Arlo Technologies as a CFO, and I think it's Ring got Shaq to just put the Ring cameras up, and that got all the attention in the whole world for a long time.
It's real. Thank you, Steve. Other comments, top of mind issues before we wrap?
I had one on the CPA. One on the CPA firms. I don't know if you're audited by the top 5, you probably haven't heard this, but a lot of the smaller firms that are still doing public company audits are feeling like they're being put out of business by the PCAOB. And in fact, a couple of these firms have already backed out of public companies. I'm going to have a small public company, and they were basically told a month and a half ago, sorry, after your year-end audit, we're done. We're not allowed to do public company audits anymore. I've heard of 2 so far. I have a couple others now that are buried in being very restrictive on who they take on, because they're going, wow, we're getting all this extra work. They're also concerned, which they've also said, your fees are going up, the one that's staying, and we have to do more work because the PCAOB is, we're afraid of being fined. So I think it's a coming trend. Their belief is that the PCAOB wants to get it to the top 5, top 6 firms, and everybody else be out of public company audits, which will be a really difficult time for small companies.
Any reactions on that, Lou and Christine?
Yeah,
Kind of looking at the two of you.
Yeah, it is. There's definitely the regulatory part of PCAOB is is really onerous now to all the firms. You know, I heard yesterday that the liability of trying to assign to specific signing partners on audits, so liability goes not to the firm but to the individual, and that is being debated now whether that's going forward or not. You know, my personal view is a better balance is needed. You know, we do not need smaller firms out of business. We need them. If you think about companies that are domestic or regional, you know, they can be handled by a regional firm, and you need different size firms to be competitive in the marketplace. You know, as a buyer of those services and a provider of those services, the large firms, you know, are needed for multinational cross-border transactions. But I would think it'd be a mistake if that's what the PCAOB is doing. I think we need all sizes to serve our marketplace. Particularly, you know, we're an innovative country, and we have a lot of startups that, you know, need reduced services. They need to feel like they're having their hand held. The like, and you know, the smaller firms are better at that to a certain extent.
Thanks, Lou. And join me in thanking Mary, Christine, Steve, and Lou here for helping lead the discussion. Kate posted the dates for the next cohort with the registration, I think, in the chat there. So you can see it January 16th, same time. I want to thank you, Lisa, and Kate and Danielle for organizing this and getting this on all our calendars. It's a small miracle these days. So look forward to seeing many of you on January 16th. If you're going to be at Summit, I hope you'll find me, say hello. We can grab a coffee or a drink at the Certified Director after party. And then, as Lisa said, whether it's with respect to these programs or quite frankly, to anything at NACD certification. Otherwise, I hope you'll always feel comfortable reaching out with feedback, ideas, questions, anything we can do to support you in your roles. Because as our conversation made clear today, it's not getting any easier. The headlines, I don't know, got it maybe 30% right, I think, but they're chasing different results. Couple of themes that I'll just sort of touch on. You know, one that kind of stood out across all of them for me was sort of be very, very clear with yourself about expectations, the role, what it takes. Stay focused, laser focused if you place. The corollary of that is make sure we're asking the right questions. You all can play a really critical role in making sure that's happening. And then I think the other one I'll end with, to Lou's point, is we want this, I think, to be win-win, right? So the regulations are driving to the right outcomes and behaviors that we need. Boards are helping to lead in a way that leads to those win-wins. And if we can get there, I'll certainly sleep well at night. Steve, Lou, Christine, Mary, thank you. Thanks to all of you. I've got, I guess, 2:30 on the clock. So I want to thank you all and look forward to seeing you again soon at another event online or in the real world.
Sounds
Thank
good.
you so much.
Thank you.
everybody.
Bye all.
Thanks, y'all.